the Maid and the mansion. The morning sun spilled through the tall windows of Wellington Estate, painting long streaks of gold across the marble floors that gleamed like mirrors. Emma Collins moved silently down the hallway, the crisp scent of lemon polish lingering behind her as she worked. The mansion was vast, filled with priceless art, chandeliers that dripped with crystals, and the quiet weight of wealth that pressed down on everyone who entered. To most people, the house was a symbol of success and power, but to Emma it was a world she served, not one she belonged to. She had worked here for nearly 3 years, long enough to know which tiles creaked, which rooms were rarely used, and exactly when to vanish into the background so that the family never truly saw her. She had learned that in a house this rich in visibility was survival. Emma was 24, young, graceful, and quietly beautiful in a way that was easy to overlook until you really looked at her. Her soft brown hair was always tied back neatly, her uniform pressed, her hands slightly calloused from long hours of work. But it was her eyes that stood out most, deep hazel, full of calm strength and a quiet kind of sadness that came from growing up too soon. She had lost her father at 10, watched her mother work herself to exhaustion to keep a tiny flower shop alive, and by the time she was 17, she had traded college dreams for practical survival. She had always told herself that working hard was noble, that dignity came from doing what was necessary, even if it meant cleaning up the lives of people who never noticed the girl holding the mop. The estate belonged to the Harrison family, though in the town everyone called them the Wellingtons. They had everything: wealth, power, influence, and a reputation that stretched far beyond the city. Victoria Wellington Harrison, the matriarch, ruled the household like an empress. She was elegant and immaculate, her diamonds catching light even when she scowled. Everything in her world was controlled, from the way the table linens were folded to the way her only son, Julian, was expected to live. To Victoria, appearances were everything, and feelings were weaknesses she had no patience for. Julian Wellington Harrison was a name people whispered with admiration and envy. 32 years old, educated in Oxford, owner of several luxury properties and soon to inherit his father's vast real estate empire. To the outside world, he was perfection personified, handsome, confident, always wearing suits that fit like armor. But behind those polished eyes was a man quietly falling apart. 3 years earlier, his wife Catherine had died in a sailing accident that still haunted the newspapers. The tragedy had broken something in him that no business meeting, no social event, no therapy session could fix. For months after her death, he disappeared from society, traveling aimlessly until his mother finally demanded his return. He came back quieter, colder, and more detached than ever. When Julian returned to the estate 6 months ago, Emma had noticed him long before he noticed her. He moved through the house like a shadow, polite, distant, and wrapped in invisible grief. Most of the staff whispered about him, about how tragedy had made him strange, about how he barely spoke to anyone, about how his mother was desperate to marry him off again to someone appropriate. But Emma didn't see a mystery to gossip about. She saw a man who looked like he was holding his breath, waiting for something to make living worth it again. One rainy afternoon, that breathless stillness broke. Emma had been dusting the library, her favorite room in the mansion. It was filled with floor-to-ceiling shelves, thousands of books, and the faint smell of old paper and oak. She often took comfort there. It felt alive with stories, with voices of people long gone. As thunder rolled outside and raindrops pattered against the tall windows, she noticed someone sitting in the corner armchair. Julian, a half-empty glass of whiskey on the table beside him. She froze, realizing she had walked straight into the room without seeing him. "I'm sorry, sir," she said quickly, lowering her gaze. "I didn't realize anyone was here. I'll come back later." His voice came quiet but heavy with weariness. "Please, stay." The silence gets heavy sometimes. It's nice to have someone else breathing in the room. Emma hesitated, unsure if that was truly an invitation or the tired rambling of a lonely man, but something in his tone made her stay. She continued dusting quietly while he stared out at the rain. Minutes passed in soft silence until his voice came again, deeper now, edged with thought. "Do you ever feel," he began, "like you woke up one day and realized your whole life is a script written by someone else?" Emma paused, the duster froze in midair. It wasn't the kind of question she expected from a man like him. Sometimes, she admitted softly, but I think that happens to everyone. We follow rules we never wrote until one day we stop. Julian turned slightly, his eyes meeting hers for the first time. They were a startling blue but dulled with sorrow. And when we stop, then we start living, she said simply. Even if it costs us everything. A faint smile touched his lips, the first real one she had ever seen. You're remarkably wise for someone your age, miss. Emma Collins. Emma Collins, he repeated as if memorizing the sound. You've given me more to think about in 2 minutes than my therapist did in 6 months. It was a small moment, fleeting and fragile, but something shifted that day. After that, Julian seemed to appear wherever Emma worked, in the library, the garden, the hallways. Sometimes he would simply nod or make a small comment about the weather. Other times, they would talk quietly for minutes at a time about books, about life, about the little things that made the days bearable. He listened to her as if she mattered, and she spoke to him as if he was human, not a millionaire grieving behind glass walls. Those conversations became their refuge, small pockets of warmth in an otherwise cold mansion. Weeks turned into months, and the boundaries between master and maid began to blur. They never meant for it to happen, but connection has its own gravity. One evening during a grand party, Emma had been working in the kitchen for hours when she stepped outside for air. The garden was bathed in golden light, laughter floating from the other side of the hedges. She thought she was alone until she heard his voice behind her. Escaping the chaos too? He asked with a small smile. Emma turned, startled but relaxed when she saw him. Just catching my breath, sir. You should be inside enjoying your guests. He laughed softly. I'd rather be anywhere but there. My mother has paraded 5 women in front of me tonight, each more unbearable than the last. You poor thing, Emma teased, though there was warmth in her tone. Imagine having to choose between all those perfect women. Julian chuckled, stepping closer. You're mocking me. Only a little. They stood side by side, the night air cool and fragrant with roses. Fireflies drifted lazily among the bushes, and for a long moment neither spoke. Then his voice dropped quieter now. Emma, can I ask you something personal? She hesitated, then nodded. Of course. Are you happy? The question caught her off guard. She thought about her tiny apartment, her modest salary, her sick mother, and all the dreams she had buried to survive. But she also thought about laughter in the bakery where she grew up, about the kindness of her aunt, about small joys like morning sunlight and the smell of bread. I'm not unhappy, she said finally. I have work. I have people who care about me. That's more than some ever get. Julian's expression softened. You have so little, yet you sound more content than I've ever been. Happiness isn't about what you have, Emma replied quietly. It's what you make of what you have. Julian looked at her for a long time and then, as though drawn by something beyond his control, he reached out and took her hand. You make me feel alive again, he whispered. Emma's heart pounded. She knew she should pull away. She knew this was dangerous, for her job, for her dignity, for everything. But in that moment, under the glow of garden lights and the distant hum of laughter, she didn't. Their fingers intertwined, and the world around them seemed to hold its breath. From that night onward, their lives began to intertwine in secret. They met in quiet corners of the estate, stolen moments behind heavy curtains, hushed words in the library long after midnight. Julian became a different man with her, gentler, warmer, more human. He laughed again, read books again, began to paint like he once did in college. Emma brought life back into him, and he gave her something she had never known, the feeling of being seen. But happiness built on secrets cannot last forever. The deeper their love grew, the closer came the inevitable discovery. And when it finally came, it shattered everything. The secret love in the storm, the days that followed were a mixture of heaven and danger, like walking on a thin bridge made of glass. Every look, every whisper between Emma and Julian was a secret that glowed brighter and more dangerous each time they met. They had learned to hide in plain sight, to move around the mansion as if nothing had changed. While beneath every polite nod and exchanged glance, there was a heartbeat, a longing that refused to be silenced. To the world, Julian Harrison remained the grieving heir returning to stability, and Emma Collins was the quiet, invisible maid who polished silver and carried linens through the endless corridors of wealth. But in private, Behind the thick walls of the old library or in the secluded garden where the roses bloomed under the moon, they became something else and two people who had found life in each other's brokenness. Julian had begun painting again. It started one quiet evening when Emma had found him standing by the tall window of the study, staring at the gray horizon. The sky was streaked with pink and gold, the colors of twilight that never lasted long enough. "You used to paint, didn't you?" she asked softly, noticing the unused canvas resting in the corner. He turned to her with surprise as though she had seen a part of him he'd forgotten. "A lifetime ago," he murmured. "Catherine hated the mess. She said it made me look unrefined." Emma smiled faintly and picked up a brush, handing it to him. "Then make a mess again. Maybe that's what you need." From that day, he did. Sometimes she would sit by the window as he painted, her hands folded in her lap, the soft hum of her voice filling the silence. He painted her once, not formally, not for show, but in the quiet honesty of emotion. The result was breathtaking. Not because it was perfect, but because it was raw. She stood among wildflowers in his imagination, her hair loose, her eyes gentle and alive. "It's not me," she said when she first saw it, blushing deeply. "It's how I see you," he replied. And in that moment she realized that for the first time in her life, someone saw her not as a servant, not as a duty, but as a soul. Their nights became worlds of their own. They spoke about everything: her father's old jokes, his childhood dreams, the loneliness of money, and the strange ways people mistake wealth for happiness. Julian confessed how trapped he felt by his mother's expectations, how every business decision, every social event, felt like a performance written for him by someone else. Emma listened quietly, understanding him in ways no one else could. "You're stronger than you think," she told him one night as they sat before the dying embers of the fireplace. "You just need someone to remind you who you are." He had looked at her then, eyes filled with unspoken emotion, and whispered, "Then don't ever stop reminding me." But happiness lived on borrowed time. Victoria Harrison, proud and sharp as a blade, began to notice the change in her son. He smiled more. He lingered around the house instead of rushing to meetings. His moods lifted for no apparent reason. To her, it was a mystery she couldn't ignore. She started watching. Subtle things gave it away. The way Julian's eyes followed the maid when she entered a room. The way Emma's hands trembled slightly when his voice came too close. Wealthy people like Victoria didn't believe in coincidences, and soon suspicion turned into certainty. The discovery came on an evening that began beautifully. The air smelled of rain and lilacs, and Emma had been in the kitchen helping prepare for a dinner party. She hadn't seen Julian all day and had missed him terribly. As the guests arrived, the wealthy and powerful of their social circle, she caught a glimpse of him from across the hall. Their eyes met for the briefest second, and a smile passed between them, invisible to everyone but them. Later that night, when the house had quieted and the guests had left, Julian sent her a message through one of the younger servants, a simple note folded twice that read, "Library, midnight." She went. The library was dim, lit only by the glow of the fireplace. Julian stood there waiting, his face soft with relief when she entered. "I thought I wouldn't see you tonight," he said, stepping toward her. She smiled faintly, setting down the tray she carried. "You always find a way." He reached for her hand and kissed her palm, the simple gesture filled with tenderness. "I missed you," he whispered. "You're the only thing that feels real in this house." She rested her head against his chest, hearing the steady rhythm of his heart. "We have to be careful," she murmured, though her words carried little conviction. "If your mother ever found out—" "Let her," Julian interrupted quietly, pulling her closer. "I'm tired of pretending that love is a crime." They stood that way for a long time, wrapped in silence, until the sound of the door creaking shattered the stillness. Emma froze. Julian turned, and there stood Victoria Harrison, her face pale with fury, her diamond earrings catching the firelight like ice. The air in the room thickened instantly. For a moment no one spoke, then her voice came, cold and sharp. "I knew it. I knew there was something filthy hiding under my roof." Emma's breath caught as Victoria's eyes sliced through her. "Get out," the older woman hissed. "Get out of my house this instant." Julian stepped in front of Emma, his jaw tightening. "Mother, stop. You don't understand." "I understand perfectly," Victoria snapped. "My son has been throwing away his dignity for a servant. You've shamed this family, Julian. Do you have any idea what this would do to our name if anyone found out? You've lost your mind. Her gaze shifted back to Emma, filled with venom. And you? You little parasite. Do you think seducing my son will lift you from the gutter? You will regret this day for the rest of your life. Emma wanted to speak, to defend herself, but the words died in her throat. Her entire body trembled, yet she stood her ground. Julian's voice broke through the chaos, firm for the first time. Enough. You will not speak to her that way. I love her, Mother, and I won't let you destroy this. The silence that followed was suffocating. Victoria's expression froze, disbelief flashing to horror, then pure rage. You what? She spat. You love her? You are willing to throw away generations of wealth, reputation, and respect for a maid? Julian's voice didn't waver. If that's what it takes to be human again, yes. For the first time, Victoria seemed speechless. Her son, who had always obeyed, was defying her. Her world, the world built on control, cracked in that instant. Then you are no son of mine, she whispered finally before turning and walking away, her heels striking the marble like thunder. The door slammed behind her, leaving only the echo of her fury and the crackle of the fire. Emma and Julian stood frozen, hearts pounding. It felt like the walls had fallen around them. You shouldn't have said that, Emma whispered. You just made her hate me even more. Julian took her face in his hands. Let her hate whoever she wants. I meant every word. I love you, and I'll face whatever comes next with you. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust that love could be stronger than power. But in her heart, fear had already taken root. For days afterward, the mansion became a battlefield. Victoria avoided Julian, but her influence spread like poison. Staff members who had once greeted Emma with smiles now avoided her eyes. Rumors whispered behind closed doors. Then one morning, the inevitable happened. Victoria called Emma into her private sitting room. The older woman sat like a queen awaiting a confession, her lips curved in a smile that did not reach her eyes. Sit, she said coolly, gesturing to a chair. Emma sat, her hands folded tightly in her lap. You think you've captured my son's heart, Victoria began, her voice soft but laced with danger. But let me make one thing clear, this will end. Either you walk away now quietly, or I will destroy you. Emma swallowed hard, forcing herself to meet her employer's eyes. I love him, she said simply, and he loves me. You can't change that. Victoria's smile widened, but her tone turned to steel. Love? She echoed with a laugh that was almost pitying. My dear, love is a luxury for the poor. In my world, it's business, alliances, legacy. My son will marry Vanessa Richmond as planned, and you will disappear. Emma's voice trembled, but her words were steady. You can threaten me all you want, Mrs. Harrison, but I won't give him up because of your pride. Victoria leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. Then I suppose I'll have to make you. It wasn't long after that when Emma discovered she was pregnant. It happened on a quiet morning when the sky was still gray and the rain tapped softly against her window. She sat on the edge of her bed, holding the small test in trembling hands, her mind spinning. Tears filled her eyes, not entirely from fear but from the sheer weight of what it meant. A new life, a piece of Julian, a piece of love that no threat could erase. She met Julian that evening in the library, her heart pounding as she told him the news. For a moment he simply stared as if time had stopped. Then his eyes softened and he pulled her into his arms. A baby, he whispered against her hair. Emma, we're going to have a baby. She felt his tears against her skin, and for one fragile heartbeat, she believed everything would be all right. But happiness once again was fleeting. The moment Julian told his mother the truth, the storm broke with fury. Victoria's rage was volcanic. She screamed, threatened, pleaded, and finally delivered the cruelest ultimatum of all. If he chose Emma, he would lose everything, his inheritance, his company, his home. You'll be nothing, she hissed. You'll drag that girl and your bastard child into poverty. Is that the future you want for them? Julian hesitated, and in that hesitation, the world crumbled. When Emma met him that night in the garden, she saw it in his eyes before he spoke. The warmth, the certainty, the fire, all gone, replaced by guilt and confusion. Emma, he began, his voice breaking, I don't know what to do. She'll cut me off. I'll lose everything. She shook her head, stepping back. You said love was enough. He reached for her hand, desperate. It is, but maybe not right now. Maybe we need time. We could. She cut him off, her voice trembling with disbelief. Time, Julian, there's a child. Our child. You want to wait until when? Until your mother dies? Until it's convenient? He fell silent, his face pale. I'm trying to protect you, he said weakly. No, she said quietly, tears burning her eyes. You're trying to protect yourself. He tried to speak again, but she stepped back, shaking her head. I loved you more than I thought I could love anyone, Julian. But love without courage isn't love at all. She turned away, her voice barely above a whisper. You don't have to choose anymore. I already have. I choose my child. And with that, she walked away. From the man she loved, from the house that had been both a cage and a dream, and from the life she had once thought she wanted. Behind her, Julian stood frozen, watching the only real happiness he had ever known vanish into the night. Emma left Wellington Estate before dawn, carrying nothing but a small suitcase, her savings and the secret hope that love, in its purest form, would survive even when hearts broke. As the city lights faded behind her, she pressed her hand to her stomach and whispered to the life growing inside her, You and me, little one, we'll be okay. The journey of a mother's strength. The bus rumbled through the dark countryside, the rhythmic sound of the wheels on wet asphalt matching the uneven beat of Emma's heart. She sat by the window, her hands resting protectively on her still flat stomach, her reflection faint in the glass against the backdrop of passing fields and distant lights. The world outside looked blurred, soaked in rain and memories. She had left Wellington Estate behind, the marble halls, the gleaming chandeliers, the whispers of wealth. All of it felt like another lifetime now, like a dream she had woken from too late. The air on the bus smelled faintly of coffee and diesel, and the few passengers were either sleeping or lost in their own quiet stories. For the first time in years, Emma had no plan, no certainty, no security. Yet beneath the exhaustion and heartbreak, there was something stronger, a resolve that felt carved from fire. She was not running away. She was walking toward something new, something hers. Her destination was Riverside, a small town 3 hours away, where her mother's sister, Pauline, owned a bakery. She remembered summers spent there as a child, the warmth of the kitchen, the smell of freshly baked bread, her aunt's laughter, and the simplicity of days untouched by wealth or sorrow. Pauline had always been the one person who never judged, who understood that love sometimes meant survival, not perfection. When Emma had called her from the payphone earlier that night, her voice shaking, Pauline had simply said, "Come home, sweetheart. I'll be waiting. No questions, no scolding, just acceptance." That word, home, made Emma cry quietly on the bus, though she wasn't sure she still knew what home truly meant. Perhaps she would find out again. It was past midnight when the bus finally arrived at Riverside Station. The small town was sleeping under a soft drizzle, its narrow streets lined with old-fashioned lampposts casting gentle pools of yellow light. The air smelled of rain-soaked earth and freshly cut grass. When Emma stepped off the bus, clutching her small suitcase, she saw a familiar old pickup truck parked under the streetlight. Pauline stood beside it, her gray hair tied back in a bun, her cardigan draped over her shoulders, her face etched with worry and warmth. The moment their eyes met, Emma's composure broke. She dropped her bag and ran into her aunt's arms, sobbing like the child she used to be. Pauline held her tight, saying nothing, letting the tears wash months of fear and heartbreak away. "Come on, darling," Pauline said gently when Emma finally quieted, her voice tender but strong. "Let's get you home." The drive through Riverside was silent except for the soft hum of the truck and the patter of rain on the windshield. Emma watched familiar landmarks pass by. The town square, the old church, the river bridge. Everything looked smaller now, but somehow more real than anything in the vast estate she had left behind. When they reached Pauline's house, a small cottage behind the bakery, its windows glowing softly in the rain, Emma felt something shift inside her. The world no longer felt like it was ending. It was simply beginning again in a different way. Inside, the warmth and smell of cinnamon wrapped around her like an embrace. Pauline had already prepared the guest room, clean sheets, a quilt, a vase of wildflowers on the table. Emma sat on the bed, still in her coat, feeling the weight of the past weeks pressing down on her. "You can stay as long as you need," Pauline said softly, placing a cup of tea on the nightstand. "We'll figure things out together." Emma tried to thank her, but the words caught in her throat. She only nodded, tears blurring her vision again. When Pauline left her alone, she lay down fully dressed, exhaustion finally overtaking her, and slept for nearly 14 hours straight. When she woke, morning sunlight streamed through lace curtains, and the sound of her aunt moving around the kitchen filled the air. For a moment, Emma forgot everything. The mansion, the heartbreak, the betrayal. She only felt the warmth of home, the softness of her pillow, the quiet miracle of being safe. But when her hand moved instinctively to her belly, everything came flooding back. She whispered softly to the child she carried, "We're going to be okay, little one. I promise you we'll be okay." Over breakfast, Emma told Pauline everything. Every word, every detail of the affair, the discovery, the cruelty, and the night she left. Her aunt listened in silence, her weathered hands wrapped around her coffee mug, her eyes kind but sharp. When Emma finally finished, Pauline sighed deeply and said, "That boy may have been raised rich, but he's poor where it matters. In courage. But you, my dear, you're stronger than you think." Emma looked down, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't feel strong." Pauline reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "That's because real strength doesn't feel like power. It feels like survival." And so began a new chapter of Emma's life, not one of comfort, but one of purpose. She began helping at the bakery, waking before dawn to knead dough, shape loaves, and fill the shop with the smell of fresh bread. Her hands ached, her back throbbed, but each day brought a strange kind of satisfaction. For the first time, her work wasn't about serving someone else's dream. It was about building her own. The customers learned her name quickly. They noticed her growing belly and offered gentle smiles instead of judgment. In Riverside, people didn't care about social rank or scandal. They cared about kindness. The old women brought knitted blankets, mothers offered hand-me-down baby clothes, and the town doctor gave her free prenatal checkups. Slowly, Emma began to heal. Months passed and the rhythm of her days became steady. She would wake before sunrise, help bake until noon, rest in the afternoon, and spend evenings reading in the garden. At night, when the town fell quiet, she would sit by her window and talk to her unborn child, telling stories about stars, about bravery, about the kind of love that never leaves. Sometimes, though, the silence brought memories she couldn't silence. There were nights she woke from dreams of Julian, his voice, his smile, the way he had once held her face and promised forever. Each dream left her trembling with both longing and pain. She missed him, yes, but she missed more the version of him she believed existed. The man who had loved her enough to fight, but hadn't. The man who had let fear become his prison. Meanwhile, back at Wellington Estate, Julian was a ghost of himself. The morning Emma left, something inside him cracked. At first, he convinced himself that she would come back, that it was only a matter of days, that she needed time to cool down. But as weeks passed and no word came, the truth began to sink in. He had lost her, not because she stopped loving him, but because he had failed to love her the way she deserved. The house that once seemed grand now felt suffocating. The chandeliers glared too bright. The hallways echoed too loudly. The silence felt unbearable. He could hear his mother's voice constantly, in meetings, at dinners, in the corners of his mind, reminding him that love was weakness, that family reputation mattered more than happiness. But each word now felt hollow. He had wealth, yes, but it tasted like ash. He tried to distract himself with business, but the numbers blurred before his eyes. Investors began to lose confidence. His employees whispered about his absences, his empty stare during meetings. At social events, he smiled on command, shaking hands, pretending he was fine. But every photograph of him taken during that time showed the same thing. A man slowly drowning in the luxury that once defined him. At night, he returned to the library. The same room where he and Emma had first talked, where they had fallen in love, where everything began and ended. He sat in the same chair, staring at the same window, the glass fogging from his breath. Sometimes, when the whiskey blurred the edges of his pain, he would imagine she was still there, humming softly, dusting books, smiling that gentle smile that made everything else fade away. But the room remained silent, and in that silence, guilt became his only companion. His mother, of course, was triumphant at first. She believed time would heal him, that he would eventually come to his senses and marry Vanessa Richmond, the woman she had chosen. But Victoria had underestimated the damage her own control had caused. The more she pushed, the colder Julian became. He refused meetings, ignored calls, and avoided social events. "You need to pull yourself together," she scolded one night at dinner, her voice sharp. "You're letting everything your father built crumble." He looked at her across the table, eyes hollow. "You destroyed everything that mattered to me," he said quietly, and walked away. Victoria didn't understand the depth of those words until much later, when even the family business began to feel the weight of his emptiness. Money could buy silence, but not peace. Power could command people, but not love. She had raised her son to be strong, but not kind. Successful, but not free. And now she watched helplessly as the walls she had built around him became his prison. Back in Riverside, Emma's pregnancy reached its final months. The bakery became her safe haven, warm, alive, full of laughter. The customers adored her. Pauline made sure she never felt alone, and the townsfolk treated her like family. When the first contractions came one stormy night in early spring, she tried to be brave, clutching Pauline's hand through every wave of pain. Hours passed. The storm raged outside, and at dawn, a baby's cry filled the small cottage. It was a girl. Small, perfect, with soft dark hair and hazel eyes that mirrored her mother's. The moment Emma held her, something inside her shifted permanently. Every fear, every tear, every heartbreak melted into love so deep it felt infinite. She named her Lila, after her mother's favorite flower. As weeks turned into months, Emma discovered that motherhood was both exhausting and miraculous. Lila became her world. The baby's laughter filled the house, her tiny hands wrapped around Emma's fingers with absolute trust. The nights were sleepless, the days endless, but every time Lila smiled, Emma felt strength surge through her again. She had nothing of wealth, but she had everything of worth. In those quiet mornings, as she rocked her baby and watched the sunrise over the town, she realized that happiness was not made of marble or gold. It was made of small moments. The smell of bread baking, the touch of little fingers, the peace of knowing she had done what was right. But far away, Julian's life continued to unravel. Rumors spread of his drinking, of his isolation, of failed business deals. He couldn't paint anymore. He couldn't sleep. Each day guilt ate away at him until one afternoon, while sorting through old belongings, he found a small photograph Emma had left behind, taken by another maid one summer afternoon, showing her in the garden surrounded by sunlight. Her smile, soft and serene, hit him like a wave. He sank to his knees, clutching the photo against his chest, and for the first time in his adult life he wept without restraint. It was then he realized that no wealth, no empire, no inheritance could fill the void of the family he had lost, the family he had been too afraid to fight for. And somewhere in the small town of Riverside, on that same evening, Emma stood by her window holding Lila in her arms, looking up at the same stars. The world was vast, their lives now divided by miles and choices, yet in some unseen way their hearts still knew of each other. She whispered softly to her sleeping child, "Your father made mistakes, my love, but someday I hope he finds his way. Not for me, for you." What she didn't know was that fate, slow but certain, was already setting the stage for that reunion, the one that would make even the proud millionaire kneel before the very love he once abandoned. The fall of a millionaire, the mansion that once symbolized triumph now felt like a tomb. Julian Wellington Harrison walked through its echoing corridors, the marble floors no longer gleaming with light but dull beneath layers of dust. The housekeepers still came, but even they moved quietly, avoiding his eyes, whispering about the man who had once ruled boardrooms, now sitting for hours in silence, staring into nothing. It had been over a year since Emma had walked out of his life, and though the world saw him as a man who had everything, he knew he had nothing left. The emptiness had grown into a living thing inside him, a shadow that followed him from room to room, whispering the same question every night. Why didn't you fight for her? His mother still hosted dinners, though fewer people attended now. The once powerful Harrison name had begun to lose its shine as Julian's disinterest in the family business became impossible to ignore. Victoria had done everything to save the empire, arranged meetings, manipulated investors, and even leaked stories to the press about her son's temporary exhaustion. But she could not control the look in his eyes, the hollow indifference that had replaced the fire he once carried. He no longer smiled, no longer argued, no longer lived. He simply existed, a shell of the man he had been when Emma was beside him. Vanessa Richmond, the woman Victoria had once envisioned as her perfect daughter-in-law, had long since moved on. After one awkward engagement dinner that ended with Julian leaving halfway through in silence, she had called off the arrangement herself. "Your son is broken," she had told Victoria coldly, "and no amount of money can fix that." Victoria had slapped the newspaper down the next morning, her lips trembling with fury. "You've humiliated this family," she shouted at Julian. "Do you even care what people are saying?" He had looked up at her, his voice quiet but cutting. "I stopped caring the day I lost the only person who made me feel alive." That night, Julian walked into the library, the same place where his love began and ended. The room smelled of dust and old whiskey. He sat before the cold fireplace, the faint glow of dying embers barely lighting his face. On the table lay a small framed photograph. Emma's, the one he had found months ago, edges now worn from being held too often. He ran his thumb over her smile, his chest tightening with memories. Her laughter, the softness of her voice, the way her eyes glowed when she spoke about hope, all of it haunted him. He remembered her words that night in the garden before she left. "You're trying to do what's easiest for you, not what's right." They echoed through his mind, each repetition a dagger. She had been right. He had chosen comfort over courage, and that choice had destroyed him more completely than poverty ever could have. As the days bled into months, Julian's business empire began to crumble. The board members, tired of his absence and poor decisions, began pushing him out of leadership. Stocks fell, deals failed, and the media, once fascinated by his brilliance, now printed stories about his downfall. "The fall of a young tycoon," one headline read. "Heir loses grip on fortune," said another. He didn't even fight back. The money that had once made him powerful now felt like poison, and he let it all slip away quietly, as though losing it was his punishment. Victoria, unable to bear the shame, withdrew from society. Her health began to decline, though she refused to admit it. She rarely spoke to her son anymore, except to remind him how far he had fallen. But even her anger lost its force when she saw the emptiness in his eyes. One evening she found him sitting in the dark, surrounded by unopened letters and dusty books. "You look just like your father," she said softly, her voice breaking. "He too let love ruin him." Julian looked at her, his expression calm but hollow. "No, Mother," he said quietly. "Love didn't ruin me. Fear did." While his world decayed in silence somewhere far away, life was blooming. Riverside, with its simple rhythm and honest people, had become Emma's world now. Her little bakery home was filled with the scent of fresh bread and baby laughter. Lila had grown into a lively 1-year-old with a mischievous sparkle in her hazel eyes and a laugh that could light up even the darkest day. She had her father's dimples, though Emma never said that aloud. Sometimes, when she looked at her daughter's smile, she saw Julian in it. The warmth, the gentleness, the possibility of redemption that she still secretly believed might live in him somewhere. But she never let those thoughts linger too long. Her world now revolved around her child, her work, and the peace she had built with her own hands. The bakery had become not just a business, but a community. People loved Emma's pastries, but they loved her heart even more. She was known as the girl who always had a kind word, who listened, who never complained. Her quiet strength inspired others. The women of the town often came to her for advice. The older folks adored Lila and called her the sunshine of Riverside. Pauline, her aunt, watched proudly as her niece transformed from a heartbroken girl into a woman of resilience and grace. "You see, child," Pauline said one evening as they closed the bakery, "sometimes life breaks us so it can rebuild us better." Emma smiled faintly, wiping flour from her hands. "Maybe," she said softly, "but sometimes it feels like the rebuilding never ends." Pauline chuckled gently. "That's because love never really leaves, even when it's gone. It just changes shape." Back in the city, Julian's nights had become unbearable. He had stopped drinking, not because he wanted to live, but because he wanted to feel every ounce of pain. He thought he deserved it. Sleep came rarely, and when it did, it was filled with dreams of Emma, her laughter, her tears, the night she walked away. Each dream ended the same way, with him reaching out, calling her name, and waking up alone in the cold, empty bed. The guilt had grown so heavy that he often found himself driving aimlessly through the city, as though motion itself could erase the stillness of his failure. One rainy evening, he stopped at a small church he had never noticed before. The doors were open, and inside the candles flickered softly. He walked in and sat at the back pew, the smell of incense and rain mingling in the air. For the first time in years, he prayed, not for wealth, not for success, but for forgiveness. "If there's still a way to make it right," he whispered, "show me how, just show me." Fate listened that night. A week later, as Julian sat in his study sorting through old files, he came across an envelope he didn't recognize, sealed in plain paper with no return address. He opened it, expecting another business notice, but what he found inside made his breath catch. It was a letter written in a familiar, delicate handwriting. Emma's. His hands trembled as he unfolded the paper. The letter wasn't new. It was dated from the week she had left. Somehow it had never been delivered. Perhaps hidden by someone in the house or misplaced by the staff. He began to read, his eyes blurring with emotion. "Julian, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. Not because I stopped loving you, but because I finally started loving myself enough to leave. I wanted to believe that our love could survive the world you live in. But I see now that your world doesn't allow people like me in it. Maybe one day you'll understand what you gave up, not because I want you to regret it, but because I want you to know what real love feels like. The kind that asks for courage, not comfort. I'm carrying a part of you with me, and no matter what happens, I'll raise our child to be strong, kind, and free. Emma." The letter slipped from his fingers. For a long time he sat motionless, the words burning into his heart. Our child. The phrase echoed again and again in his mind. He had known deep down, but seeing it in writing shattered something inside him. He pressed his palms against his face, tears streaming freely now. "A child," he whispered. "I have a child." For the first time in years, purpose stirred in him again. He had no idea where she was, but he would find her. He would find them both. He would make it right, even if it took the rest of his life. The search began quietly. He hired no investigators this time. He didn't want the intrusion of money or power. He started by visiting small towns, following faint traces of her past, old addresses, records, places she might have gone. Every clue led nowhere, but he refused to give up. He sold off his share of the company, left the mansion, and bought a modest car. He traveled for months, through small villages and towns, speaking to anyone who might remember a young woman with kind eyes and a baby girl. Many didn't, but a few did, faintly. "Yes, I think there was a girl like that. Worked at a bakery somewhere near the river towns." That was all he needed. One late afternoon, as the sun set over the hills, he arrived in Riverside. The town was small, warm, and alive with simple charm. He parked near the square, uncertain, his heart pounding in his chest. And then, through the bakery window, he saw her. Not the girl he had once known, but a woman transformed. Her hair was pulled back loosely, a few strands framing her face. She wore a simple dress dusted with flour, her hands busy arranging fresh loaves on the counter. And beside her, standing on a small stool, was a little girl with soft brown curls and eyes that gleamed like sunlight through honey. His eyes. Julian stood frozen on the street, the world around him fading away. His throat tightened, his vision blurred, and for a moment he couldn't breathe. Every emotion he had buried, guilt, love, regret, longing, crashed over him at once. He pressed a trembling hand against the glass, watching them. The little girl laughed, and Emma turned, her face softening as she smiled down at her child. The sight broke him completely. He stepped back, leaning against the wall, tears falling freely. He had found them, but now he had to find the courage to face them. That night he stood outside the bakery long after it closed, watching the lights go out one by one. He could see them through the upstairs window. Emma reading a story to their daughter, her voice gentle, her expression peaceful. It was everything he had ever wanted, and everything he had thrown away. As he watched the two of them bathed in the soft glow of lamplight, he whispered to himself, "I will make this right. No matter what it takes, I will earn their forgiveness." The next morning, when the bakery opened, Emma stepped outside to arrange the bread stand, and there he was, standing across the street, hands trembling, eyes filled with tears. The past and present collided in that moment, and the air itself seemed to still. She froze, her heart racing, disbelief flooding her face. He took a slow step forward, his voice breaking as he said the only words that mattered. "Emma, please don't run. I just want to see her once." And in that quiet little street under the morning sun, Two lives that had been torn apart by fear stood face to face again, one seeking forgiveness, the other still holding the power to give it. The smile that broke his silence. The morning light spread gently across the quiet streets of Riverside, painting the cobblestones in soft gold. The air smelled faintly of warm bread and dew, and a few early risers walked their dogs or opened shop windows. The world looked calm, unhurried, unaware that a single moment unfolding on that street corner would change 3 lives forever. Julian stood there, frozen in front of the bakery, his hands shaking, his heart pounding against his ribs like it was trying to escape. He had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times during sleepless nights, imagined what he would say, how she might react, what words could possibly mend what he had broken. But now, standing there, words felt small, powerless against the weight of all he had done. Emma stepped outside, carrying a small tray of fresh croissants to place near the window display. She looked radiant in a simple white dress, her hair tied back with a ribbon, flowers still dusted faintly on her cheek. Her life had given her a new kind of beauty, the quiet strength of a woman who had survived heartbreak and rebuilt herself from nothing. When she lifted her eyes and saw him standing across the street, the world seemed to stop. The tray nearly slipped from her hands. For a moment she thought she was imagining him, a ghost conjured by memory and morning light. But then he spoke, his voice low and trembling, and the sound broke her disbelief into reality. "Emma," he said softly, almost afraid to breathe her name. "Please don't run. I just want to see her once." Emma's heart stuttered painfully in her chest. 1,000 memories rushed back. The nights in the library, the laughter, the promises, the betrayal, the lonely walk away from the mansion. Her instinct screamed to turn around, to protect the peace she had built, but another voice, smaller and quieter, whispered that maybe this moment was inevitable. She didn't speak right away. The street was still, the town quiet, as she looked at the man who had once been her everything. His once perfect suit was replaced by a simple shirt and worn jacket, his hair slightly longer, his face lined with exhaustion. The arrogance and polished charm that once defined him were gone. In their place stood a man stripped bare, humbled, broken, human. She didn't move as he stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. When he stopped a few feet away, he swallowed hard before speaking. "I looked for you," he said. "For months. I went to every town, every place I thought you might go. I didn't want to use money or power. I wanted to find you myself. You have no reason to believe me, but I never stopped loving you. Not for a single day." Emma's voice came quiet but steady. "And yet you stopped fighting for me when it mattered." The words hit him harder than any blow. He lowered his gaze, nodding slowly, his throat tightening. "I know I was weak. I was scared. I let fear and pride make choices that destroyed everything I cared about. You were right. I chose what was easy, not what was right. And I've paid for it every day since. I lost everything, Emma. The business, the house, my reputation. All of it means nothing without you. But losing you, that was the only thing I couldn't live with." She stared at him, torn between anger and sorrow, between the pain of the past and the truth of the man before her now. Part of her wanted to scream, to ask why he had come now after so long, to tell him that apologies couldn't erase what had been done. But then she thought of the little girl upstairs, sleeping peacefully in her bed, the child who carried his eyes and his smile. And she realized that whether she wanted it or not, their lives were forever intertwined. Julian took a shaky breath and looked at the bakery window, his voice breaking slightly as he asked, "Is she my daughter?" Emma's throat tightened. She hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "Her name is Lila." He closed his eyes, exhaling shakily as tears slipped down his face. "Lila," he repeated softly as though tasting the word for the first time. "That's beautiful." For a moment neither spoke. The morning sounds filled the silence. A dog barking in the distance, the faint ringing of a bicycle bell, the breeze rustling the bakery awning. Emma finally stepped aside, her tone quiet but firm. "You can come in. She'll wake soon." Julian followed her into the small, warm bakery. The smell of cinnamon and sugar filled the air, sunlight spilling through the lace curtains. Everything was simple, cozy, alive, so different from the cold perfection of Wellington Estate. He looked around, his eyes taking in the details. The tiny shoes near the door, the little drawings on the wall, the small crib in the corner of the room beyond the counter. Each thing told a story of love and effort, of a life built from nothing but heart and resilience. It humbled him deeply. When Emma returned from the staircase carrying the sleepy toddler in her arms, Julian's breath caught. Lila blinked up at him with wide hazel eyes, her small hands rubbing at her cheeks. She had Emma's delicate features, but her smile, that was his. The same soft curve, the same warmth. For a moment, the world disappeared. Tears blurred his vision as he whispered, "She's perfect." Emma stood a few feet away, cautious, uncertain. "Lila," she said gently, this is a friend." The little girl tilted her head curiously, then smiled shyly before stretching her tiny hand toward him. Julian knelt slowly, his voice trembling as he spoke. "Hi, sweetheart," he whispered. I'm your friend Julian." When her small hand touched his cheek, something inside him broke completely. He felt the warmth of her skin, the innocence of her trust, and the unbearable weight of knowing how much he had missed. Tears streamed down his face as he smiled through them. "You're even more beautiful than I imagined," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. Emma watched silently, her heart heavy with conflicting emotions. Part of her wanted to hold on to her anger, to the walls she had built for protection. But seeing him there, this once proud man on his knees weeping at the sight of his daughter, stirred something deeper than resentment. It reminded her of why she had loved him once, why she had believed in him before the world had hardened him, and perhaps why she had never fully stopped. Julian stayed kneeling, his eyes locked on his daughter, his voice breaking as he turned to Emma. "I don't deserve her," he said softly. "And I don't deserve you. But if you'll let me, I want to try to be the man you both need. I can't erase what I did, but I can spend the rest of my life making up for it. I want to be part of her life, even if you can never forgive me." Emma felt tears gathering in her eyes, though she tried to blink them away. "Do you think forgiveness is that simple?" she asked quietly. "You left me when I needed you most. You broke promises, Julian. I had to become everything, mother, father, provider, and on my own. I cried myself to sleep every night, wondering how you could love me one day and disappear the next." He lowered his head, his voice barely audible. "I know, and I'll never forgive myself for that." The silence stretched long between them. Lila had wandered off to the corner, playing with a small wooden toy. The sunlight fell softly across her face, catching in her curls. Emma looked at her, at this tiny piece of love that had come from so much pain, and finally sighed, her voice trembling. "You can't undo the past, Julian, but if you truly mean what you say, then prove it. Not with money or grand gestures. Prove it with presence. Prove it with patience." Julian lifted his eyes, hope flickering faintly there. "Does that mean I can stay?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked down at Lila, who had toddled back and was tugging at Julian's sleeve, showing him a little cookie she had been nibbling. He smiled through his tears and accepted it, laughing softly as she tried to feed him a piece. The sound, her child's laughter blending with his broken joy, filled the room with a strange, healing light. Emma's throat tightened. Something inside her gave way, not because she had forgotten the past, but because she saw for the first time that he truly had changed. She nodded slowly. "You can stay." For her. Those 3 words felt like redemption. Julian closed his eyes, exhaling shakily, tears streaming freely again. "Thank you," he whispered. "You'll never regret it. I swear I'll be worthy of this second chance." Over the next weeks, Julian became a quiet presence in their lives. He helped around the bakery, fixing shelves, painting walls, carrying supplies. He learned to knead dough under Pauline's watchful eye, often earning her teasing laughter. The townsfolk were cautious at first, whispering about the stranger who had come from the city. But they soon saw the sincerity in his actions. Every morning he arrived early to sweep the front, and every evening he played with Lila in the garden, her laughter echoing through the street. For the first time in his life, Julian understood the meaning of real wealth, not in money but in moments. Each time Lila called him Papa by accident, his chest ached with both joy and sorrow. Each time Emma smiled, and even briefly, he felt as though the sun had come out after years of winter. Slowly the distance between them began to fade. Conversations grew warmer, dinners turned lighter, and the heavy silence of the past gave way to something fragile but alive. Hope. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and the bakery lights glowed softly, Julian stood by the doorway watching Emma read to Lila. The little girl giggled as Emma made funny voices, her eyes wide with delight. Julian leaned against the frame, tears in his eyes, a smile breaking through the sorrow that had long defined him. When Emma looked up and met his gaze, something passed between them. Not the passionate love of before, but something deeper, quieter, more real. It was forgiveness, unspoken but understood. Months later, on a bright spring morning, the three of them walked through the park together, hand in hand, laughter replacing silence. Lila ran ahead chasing butterflies, her giggles filling the air. Emma turned to Julian, her voice gentle but steady. "You've changed," she said. "You're not the man I left." He looked at her, eyes soft. "I had to lose everything to find out what mattered." They walked in silence for a while before Emma whispered, "Maybe we both needed time to become who we were meant to be." He reached for her hand carefully, almost afraid to touch it, but she didn't pull away. Their fingers intertwined naturally like a memory reborn. In that moment, under the vast blue sky surrounded by the laughter of their child, the past finally found its peace. Julian looked down at Lila, who had stopped to pick a flower and was now running back toward them, her tiny arms open wide, her smile bright as the morning sun. He knelt to catch her, lifting her high into the air as she laughed, her joy pure and unrestrained. And in that instant, holding the child he once feared, standing beside the woman who had taught him the meaning of love, he began to cry. Not the tears of guilt this time, but of gratitude, of forgiveness, of grace. Emma watched them, her heart full, her eyes glistening. Life had broken them once, but it had also given them a second chance. Not because they were perfect, but because they had learned that love, real love, isn't about never falling. It's about finding the strength to rise again, together. As Julian pressed a kiss to his daughter's forehead, the little girl reached out, touched his face, and smiled. The same innocent, radiant smile that had once belonged to Emma, the same smile that had saved him from himself. And in that moment, Julian knew he had found his redemption. He looked up at Emma through tears and whispered softly, "Thank you for giving me my life back." And she smiled, not the smile of a maid or a millionaire's love, but of a woman who had conquered pain and chosen hope. "It was never mine to give," she said gently. "You just had to learn how to live it." The sun bathed them in golden light as they stood there, the once broken man, the strong woman, and the child who had healed them both, a family not built by wealth or status, but by forgiveness, courage, and love that had survived every storm.